And we're going to continue with our next panel, which is called Music in the Face of Environmental Challenges. So we're going to explore the intersection of music and environmental sustainability. We know that music industry grapples with its ecological footprint, all the way from production to distribution and live performances. So we'll discuss some of the innovative strategies and practices being adopted to address these challenges. And today we're joined by two of our experts here, Gwendolenn and Antanas Kamenskas. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves a little bit and tell the audience about what you do and who you are? Glenn?
Hi everyone, really happy to be there. So my name is Gwen and I run an organization which is based in France called The Green Room. It's an NGO working on environmental and social issues in the music industry. And I myself come from the music industry. I've been working for about 20 years. I started as a programmer for a festival in Poland for 8 years and then worked as a tour manager. So I also practiced quite a lot of, I would say, bad practices in the business, which made me rethink also the way we work in the music industry. And I will tell you more about it in a moment.
Great. Danny?
Hi, my name is Antanas, and I'm representing the Green Lakes vinyl pressing plant.
What do you do? Tell us a bit more about Green Lakes. You're pressing vinyl, right? When you started, what are the artists you're working with? Yeah.
Well, short history. So we started like 1.5 years ago, and I know, pressing 140, 180 grams, 7 inches, 12 inches, like you name it.
That's great. I'll be your moderator for today, Tomas Paliūnas. I work at the T51 Music Group. And we are going to start with a short presentation that Gwen has made for us. It should take about 20-ish minutes. So let's hear from Gwen.
Thank you, Tomas. I guess we're all kind of digesting right now, so I'll try to make this a little bit dynamic, and I don't want to preach too much. But still, I thought it's always good when we start to talk about those issues to be on the same stage of information, and also to see what are right now the work that is being done on a European level, more or less. But I will also take some examples from outside of Europe and give you also a bit of background of the work that we do. So just a few words about the Green Room. So we have 5 main areas of work. One is working with all the stakeholders from the music industry, so programmers, bookers, artists, of course, technicians, decision makers as well, and raising awareness, but also training them on the issues that are linked to environmental climate issues, but also very much in link with social issues. Second one is operational support, so this is mostly working with musicians, supporting them whenever they want to tour in a greener way, or they want to look at merch, or they want to have solutions to have a better way of producing their vinyls. So we provide this support. Third one is about cooperation. We are working quite a lot with European projects, and we think that it's very important also to contextualize this issue. You know very well, for instance, that it's very different being in France, for instance, and saying that, okay, we can take the train. Here, it's way more difficult. So it's also about exchanging those issues, mostly, again, on a European level. Action research, so we have a few data available. Most of them do come from the UK. We had an organization that maybe you've heard of, which is called Julie's Bicycle, which is based in London, and they've been working on this subject in the music industry and supporting also big names, like they are working right now with Coldplay. So we have quite a lot of numbers coming from the UK, but not so many really, like, again, context-based and dedicated to specific issues or specific countries. And last but not least, we also work with different networks on the European level. I had a chance to meet Vilma when we were working with EMI, for instance, so working with the export offices, trying to see what are the specific issues and where we can advocate on the EU level for funding, but also for some solutions. So this is also a big part of our work. I'm sorry if it's a bit blurry, but I'm really happy to share my presentation with anyone that would like to go into this after. But this is something that I like to show just to show you that climate change, which is the big subject that we talk about right now, which is quite the big topic, is just this little dot there, but it's very much interlinked with other issues, be it environmental issues, question of water, access to biodiversity, but also very much linked to other geopolitical and social issues. This is the way we work, in the sense that we are not going to take some decisions just because they are greener, but we are also taking into consideration other impacts that this might have. And we'll have the occasion also to speak about that concerning gender issues, for instance. And the other one, this is an economical approach. This is the donut theory that you might know as well. And this is also showing how we should live within some limits, having this what you have on the outskirts, which is the ecological ceiling, so planetary limits that we shouldn't cross, and what's, I would say, the basis of our societies, which are the social floor, which also should be respected. So the ideal world we should live in, and that works also for the music industry, would be within this green circle that you have in the middle, this donut. So this is also to show you a more economical approach. Where do we stand in terms of climate change? Because we have those objectives being in Europe now, whenever we apply for funding, be it on the European scale, of course, but more and more also on the national scale. We need to respect those objectives somehow. This is for the whole society, of course, for any type of industry, but the music industry doesn't live alone in a bubble. It's very much interlinked with all those issues. We depend very much on fossil fuels, we depend very much on flights, we depend very much on food. All those issues are part also of our reality. So what we know now is that the heating has reached 1.2 degrees since what we call the pre-industrial part. And this is a fact that we know for sure, and we know that humans are 100% responsible for this. More than half of all the CO2 emissions that we've emitted have been emitted in the last 30 years. So we see this acceleration which is going on, and we are not in trajectories that are very much in favor of climate measures and of CO2 reductions. And this is also something that we see that the objectives that we had, if you remember the climate conference that took place in Paris with the Paris agreements. So we have very clear objectives. If we want to stay at a maximum of 1.5 degrees of heating, this is pretty much impossible to reach now. So the objectives now are to stay well below 2 degrees. Of course, this doesn't have the same consequences depending on where you are in the world. And we have those objectives that are, before we were talking about objectives for 2100, now we are talking about 2050. It seems quite far away, but this is obviously happening right now already. We've all experienced, I think, festivals being cancelled because of extreme weather events. This is happening more and more. There are many, for instance, in the US now, many festivals are struggling to get insurance because there are too many risks in the places where the festival is happening, so no insurance wants to cover them anymore. All the prices are increasing. So the consequences are here already. And the IPCC report, so this group of scientists that are working on climate change, are already telling us also that some of the effects of climate change are going to take 20, 40, 50, sometimes centuries also, to be solved if we want to come back to something that would be neutral for the planet. In terms of policies, because obviously this is the way to go, right now, if nothing changed, meaning also that nothing would be worse, we are on a trajectory of 3.2 degrees of heating. And this is going to have massive consequences. So EU Green Deal, we have to reduce by 55% our emissions by 2030, basically tomorrow, and 80% by 2050. The objective of that would be to have to get rid of all the fossil fuels and coal that we use. Obviously, this is not something that we can do from one day to another, so we need to adapt as a society, and same goes for the music industry. We will have to adapt to those new consequences. What I was telling you also about this fact that climate change doesn't impact people the same way depending on where you live, the reality is that it impacts more people that are less responsible for emissions, be it mostly people from the global south. But we also know, for instance, that the poles are heating twice faster as the rest. Maybe you've read also during the summer, the Mediterranean Sea is turning into a tropical sea. There was the level of, average level of temperature of the sea was 29 degrees. So this has also a lot of consequences on, of course, biodiversity, but also on how people live and work around those areas. When I talk about social dimension, this is a very important aspect. We had in France, if you remember, this Gilets jaunes a few years ago. This came from a measure that was taken by the government saying basically it was about taxing the fuel for your car. Obviously, this was impacting people that have to take the car to go to work in a very concrete way and very immediate way, and that was why this was very strongly rejected. So in terms of putting some measures for environmental issues, it's very important to make sure that it's done in a fair way and that it doesn't impact people that are already struggling. So that's one very important dimension. The second one, because very often you would hear that, yes, but in the music industry we are already struggling very much to, as an artist, for instance, to live, to make money of what I'm doing, or like the venues. But as an industry, we also have a big impact. There is a lot of money also in this industry. And what we know is the more we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. And this is true for all industries, for all societies, but it's very true to us as well. Yeah, this is, sorry, really, because I didn't expect to have such a big screen, but I'm going to tell you. I was talking about those research that we are doing and some of the numbers that we know and that we need also to know where we prioritize our actions and where we have to work. Festivals were really pioneers in tackling environmental issues. Probably the first thing that they were doing was working with waste, because waste was very much visible. You couldn't accept to be like in front of the stage and being surrounded by plastic cups. There was also legislation that started to forbid to use single-use plastics. But if you look at current studies about the carbon footprint of the music industry, be it for festivals or for venues, you see that this part of waste is really small in terms of carbon impact, but the bigger impact is coming from audience. So audience coming to festivals or audience coming to the venues. The part of the artist travel is smaller, but this is also because obviously there's less people in terms of artists traveling to a venue or festival than there are from the audience. And you also have quite, depending on the countries actually, because in France, so this study was made with 4 venues and festivals mostly in France, so urban area, rural area, big venues, small venues. And there was also Beam House in Amsterdam and Oslo Jazz Festival in the festivals that were studied. And you can see very big differences for the impact of energy. This is explained because in France we have nuclear power plants, which causes also other problems, but it has a very small carbon footprint, whereas if you still use fossil fuel, gas, or coal, this has a bigger impact. So that's the difference that you might see in some studies. Another study that we did also was about, so specifically on the audience, so this is still in French, sorry, but you can practice your French, and I think it's quite easy to understand, but we studied different venues in France, so that's the capacity, so you have from 200 to 1,400, and this is the average distance that is being traveled by the audience. And as you can see, the bigger the venue, the further away the audience is coming from. The one that is at 1,300, this is a venue in Grenoble, so a city south of Lyon in France. And people are traveling more or less 100 kilometers to get there. This also asks a question of why this venue, being in a city center in Grenoble, which is quite a big city, is not able to attract local audiences, like people would come from far away. So it's also a different way of approaching audience development and thinking about this impact. And the image that you have on the top right there, maybe you've seen that. This is Burning Man. Leave no trace, but somehow there are things that are very much visible and some others which are less, but this is like the crowd going there, having a festival in the middle of the desert. It's happening right now, actually, I think. Last year, they had really big issues, and even some people died there because of the conditions, and they couldn't leave the festival because of massive floods. So this is also a reality. Not to bring back bad memories, but we had some kind of a rehearsal of all of this with the COVID. I always like to say that in the music industry, we are super good at solving problems when they appear, not so good at planning ahead, not so good at planning for risks that we face. And these are like two solutions that artists came up with during COVID. One was in Barcelona, a concert for plants, and the other one was in Germany. So everyone in every audience, like every person in one car. These are, of course, two, like I would say, caricatural examples. But I quite like it because then you can also think ahead, like, what would I do? What would happen? How can I adapt also to some situations? There's also a very, very strong link between the music industry and flying. Obviously, I'm not saying that artists shouldn't fly. I obviously flew here. But still, probably you would see more imaginary or more like pictures like this around flying that you would see around trains or around other ways of cycling. A few examples, that was the last edition of Tallinn Music Week. So you had the Korea-Taiwan showcase that you had actually a boarding pass to get there, a festival that is happening on a French island, Réunion Island, Sakifo, so they have the local plane company as a sponsor, so the whole entrance to the festival is like this. This is Hellfest Festival. They made a partnership with the local airport, so you actually have the guitar in front of the airport and you have a special space to host everyone there. Yeah, so those examples are all over the place. Obviously, when you have state support, it's easier to get rid of those sponsors. When you are in the US, like this example of a jazz festival, you can see that the logo of Shell here is even bigger than the names of the artists. So this is very interesting also to look at. In terms of CO2 emissions, I think you know that, but it's always good to remember also those numbers. Obviously, flying is way more impactful, but for many countries and many destinations, we don't have alternatives. Or if the alternative is to take a car, let's say you would like to go to south of Spain by car, then if you travel by car on your own, probably your impact will be bigger than if you would fly, actually. So it's also this question of what kind of benefits we can find in this. So this is being also studied in making sure that we still, for me, it would be really fine if it was only artists traveling by plane, actually. But it's also about working on infrastructure, so being trained, being also having cheaper trains than plane, but also looking at different ways of rethinking how artists move. Because you don't move just to go for a show, but you might move to go for training, to meet other people, and if this is, or for residency, for instance, if this is developed in the way that artists can stay longer in their destination and being paid for what they do outside of just playing gigs, that could also change the perspective on that. I don't know how long I have still, if I need to... Yeah, okay. And what I was saying also in terms of fairness, this is an example. I used to live in Katowice, actually, so that's why I'm putting this. But you can see that taking a train in France, so from Paris to Bordeaux, and from Gdansk to Katowice, the impact is also going to be very different. Because, again, in France, you will have nuclear power plants for the trains, whereas in Poland, it's still very much depending on coal. This is also a reality that is not just particular to the music industry, obviously, but those numbers I find interesting also. Only 5 to 10% of the world's population flies in any year, so this is a minority actually, and we are part of this privileged minority that can fly. And there's like 10 countries that account for 60% of the whole impact of the aviation. If we look at the top 3 countries for total emissions, so we have the US, China, and the UK. US and China, you would understand because obviously big countries, big numbers of population. But top 5, if you look at per capita, that would be Singapore, Finland, Iceland, Australia, and the UK again. In terms of repartition also, this was very striking for me coming from France. It's only 2% of the population that takes half of the flights. You have quite big differences. Netherlands, so 8% or 42%. Canada, 22% takes 73% of the flights. UK, that's 15% of the population taking 70% of the flights. And in the US, it's 12% out of 66. We were talking about that during lunch, actually, and I was sharing that I was traveling in the US by train and touring there. And I didn't do the study yet, but I'm pretty sure that because sometimes we hear more and more festivals in Europe saying, like, we stop inviting artists if they fly. And that would impact differently the artists depending on where they are. But I'm pretty sure that if you invite a US artist for a tour in Europe and that you make them travel taking as little flights as possible, that would be less impactful in terms of carbon footprint than if they would actually tour in the US. Because then in the US it's really difficult to go from one city to another without flying. So this is also a different way of looking at things and changing perspectives. And this is a dedication to you, but I quite like that also. In the UK, 46% of vinyl purchased and never listened to. For different reasons, but there's also this thing that you go to a show, you want to remember, you have merch there, and sometimes merch is only vinyl. You're going to buy the vinyl because you like the object, you want to have this memory, but actually you're not going to listen to it after. So this is also something that is being thought and approached differently. One example here on the left, this is a project by Nick Mulvey, a UK artist that gathered some plastic on the beach in Cornwall, and he made a vinyl out of the plastic that he collected, so a recycled plastic. And all the money that he made from selling the vinyls went to, I think it was Surfers for Sewage, so a charity fighting for no more plastics in the sea. And this is also another alternative. This is, I forgot how do you call this, what you have on wine bottles? Cork, yeah, thanks. So this is what you would put under your drink, made out of cork. And so the artist worked with a visual artist, and they made this really interesting, I find, attractive projects, taking pictures of their city. And then you can download the album on this. So you still have an object and this. I'm not saying we shouldn't buy vinyls. I'm a big fan of vinyls as well. It's not... and also to make maybe a link with the previous panel, if you were there, because I heard quite a lot like anything can be done with technologies, the future is bright and there's no limits, but there are actually. Digital technologies are not sustainable technologies for the reason that we do use a lot of rare earth, rare metals, for instance, to make our phones, our computers, all this, and the more we develop all those tools, be it like Google or whatever is being invented now, and this is going very fast also. In 2010, we just had a few things like computers, video games, and phones. Now, pretty much everything is connected and with this impact. This is going to, at some point, governments are going to make some decisions, because what we use for this is also what you would use if you need to go to the hospital and do an MRI. So those choices are going to be made, whether it is for the materials, whether it is for also the internet band, like to limit also this. So this is also, I think, something to keep in mind. But it is also very interesting at this time what's happening in the music industry, because people are getting organized, experimenting a lot of things, and this is not something that we are just facing and being, I would say, passive. There are many ways of looking at this, and what I like to speak about is also what we call co-benefits, meaning that working on any other topic that is related to social topics or environmental topics might have some benefits on other things. For instance, if we work on being slower in traveling, this will have also some benefits for mental health for musicians, for instance, having musicians being better paid. So those co-benefits are things that are very interesting, and that can be also a different approach to convince some politicians, for instance, that would be quite reluctant of working on environmental issues. If you start talking about money, for instance, this is going to be way easier. And just one last example that I want to show you, or maybe two if I have time. Yeah. To prove you that this is actually possible. This was a tour, so this is pre-COVID period. But a tour, so on the left in black you have the tour as it was supposed to be. And then rethinking the touring, so to have less flights and less crazy traveling from north to south or east to west. This was like the improved routing allowed to lower by 50% the carbon emissions, but it was also less kilometers. So for the artist, this was just one DJ. It was less tiring, and it was also less flights, so 13 instead of 28, and they managed to save money on the tour as well. So this is also what I call co-benefits, that it goes above. Second one is a project in the jazz sector in France. This is a program for emerging artists, so French emerging bands that are being supported to develop their career and to tour. And since 2 years, they have some partnerships also internationally. They do tour quite a lot in the Baltic states, actually, and in Indonesia. And they really wanted to keep these partnerships to still travel there, but they just rethought a bit how they travel. So if they would come, for instance, to Tallinn, then maybe they would just, whenever possible, take the train somewhere or travel differently. And same in Indonesia. And as you can see there, so in 22, there were 108 concerts, so same number of concerts, one more even in 23. The amount of CO2 was reduced from 40 to 28, less kilometers, obviously. There were actually more musicians supported, so 14 in 23 and 12 in 23. And the amount of CO2 emissions was reduced. And that was really small efforts that were made just about retouring. So we didn't go that far into what we could do. And that's it for me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Gwen. I have a round of applause for sure. I have loads of questions, but let's pick Antanas' brain a little bit. First of all, is there anything that perhaps you want to add, anything you've heard interesting, anything you want to comment on from what you've heard before I go with the questions?
Yes, the slide which had the vinyl on it, so the important message is that if you buy the vinyl, listen to it. Don't just put it into the shelf and watch it. Because usually when you are buying the vinyl record, you're also getting the digital files with it. And listening digital on and on and on and on, it has maybe a bigger impact on the environment than buying and listening to the vinyl. And I would really like to listen to that record to see what is the quality like from the picked plastic. But there, in point of the artist, so artists can also now have plenty of choices to make the vinyl production greener, like doing recycled vinyl, regrinded vinyl, which we also do in our facility, and it has exactly the same quality as the virgin vinyl.
So tell us a little bit more. Yeah, that's very interesting. So can you tell us a little bit more about this sustainable alternative to the traditional materials that were used? Are you mostly using those new materials, reused materials, or are you still using the old stuff? Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
We are reusing all the stuff which is left from the production, all of it. We are rewriting it, and you will see it on Saturday during the visit. And we are reusing that regrinded material 100%. So this is one of the options. But in terms of technology, there will be soon the possibility to buy the plant-based PVC, plant-based vinyl. Now you can get the vinyl which was made with less oil, which is also called like...
So the materials are improving as well, right?
Because the material itself, it has the 50% of all the vinyl in terms of carbon footprint. Then 30% is the energy what you're using in your facility. Then 13% is the outer sleeve or the cover. Right. The rest, the lacquer production, stampers, packaging, it is not this much. And for example, everyone thinks that the shrink wrap, which is put on the record at the end, that it is a huge thing. It is not.
Right.
The impact is like, I don't know, maybe 1 gram of CO2.
Minimal, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of the production process, how has it changed working with these new materials compared to the old vinyl factories? Is it more difficult? Is it easier? Is it the same? What do you feel about the production process with these new materials?
It is not more difficult. It is it gives the facility savings as well. So especially when we already started working with this plant-based PVC, and it is still in the trial stages, but we can already say that we have a reduction of usage of gas, electricity. Cycles are much not long, but much shorter. So positive impact for everyone.
Yeah, it's great where you can balance the positive environmental effects with lower costs as well. And talking about the perhaps record labels or musicians that make orders at your factory, have you noticed anyone specifically asking these questions? How eco-safe are the materials, and has there been more awareness from record labels and musicians, would you say? How are they viewing this topic?
Well, I would say that there were several which asked about the eco possibilities, but not much. The only label so far which is asking for 100% is our label, Green Lakes Records.
Right. Nice.
Because that one, for that one, we always have like the high standards, and we need to have it like recycled, and you don't do, for example, colored or like 5 options of one album, or you don't put a lot of bells and whistles on the covers, because everything costs money and energy. Then, for example, everyone wants to have the splatter records. They look really nice. But when you take the carbon footprint, it increases all the carbon footprint of the record by 23%, which is really significant.
So it's also about wondering about marketing sort of perspective. If you're also like doing a label, and then you're thinking about making sure you're going to communicate that message that all the vinyl is made from these ecological materials. How much of a difference do you think this will make, or perhaps you've already seen that making a difference with any of the records that were ordered and printed at the plant, from any of the stories that either artists or labels have told you? How do you view it from the marketing side, the environmental bit?
Oh, environment is always sexy. So, but in the end, from my perspective as a human being, you need to think more about the environment itself, but not about the additional chance to get the money. But more and more labels will start asking the question, and you need to have the proof that you are using like the solar energy, or you are using recycled material. Even the legislation now is much more strict. You can't do all this like greenwashing. You can't put a slogan that we are the greenest pressing plant in the world. If you are stating this, you need to have paperwork, and you need to prove it.
And I guess it's getting more looked after, as Gwen mentioned in her presentation, with the EU rules coming in and those targets. How affected are you by those? And do you view it as an opportunity for the business perhaps as well to improve on the cost that you're incurring and things like that?
Yeah. Because recently we invested a lot of money into all the recycling, and we already have very good results, because we have less waste. We can reuse a lot of material, and we are going more or less into the like closed cycle, that everything is reused.
That's great, and we saw that stat that 42% of the vinyl is never listened to. So, as a business, how do you think you can balance that tension between encouraging new sales and perhaps promoting reusing and reselling like Discogs? How does that dynamic work in sort of suggesting that people buy more vinyl, or they just reuse? How do you this question?
This message should come more from the artists and from the labels. That buy what you really want to buy, and don't go for like, if I have 7 colors don't release the 7 colors of the same album, like do just 1 color. Then think about the packaging, because if you are like choosing a gatefold for a single record, it increases the CO2 emission much more than if you had the usual like 3mm one. Then I know also encourage to, if you don't like the album, then put it on the Discogs. And because the vinyl, you don't go on the street and you don't see the vinyl records in the bins. So it has a long life cycle.
It doesn't end up back in the environment mostly, like other trash, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Antanas. Let's expand a little bit on the environmental questions that relate to music. So I was just generally wondering how you both see the role of music in raising awareness about environmental issues. Can it truly influence change? Or is it more about just spreading awareness? What do we think, Gwen?
For me, I take this perspective from the whole industry, because the tendency is often to say that it's the responsibility of artists to communicate to the audience. And I don't fully agree with that. For me, I never interact with the artistic part, with the artists I work with. Obviously, I choose artists that I like their work, and I share some values with them. But then I would never tell them if they don't feel comfortable about talking about that, or for me, it's not like, I don't really know any good songs about the environment, to tell you the truth, so I really disconnect that. On the other hand, I think that as an industry, we have so much responsibility. Just talking about myself, being able to have a microphone in my hand and to talk to people, this comes with a responsibility. And that's the same for all people in the industry. And this goes hand in hand with other social issues as well. I'm not saying that the music industry is going to save the world. This is not why I do what I do, but it's really because I see the risks that we face. If I give you an example, which is totally outside from the music sector, but if we talk about mountains and skiing, in France right now, we know that in 20 years, probably we're not going to have snow in the Alps anymore. And you have some ski stations that decided that they're going to rethink totally their economical model and stop focusing only on winter, and on skiing people. And then you have other stations that are still, or resorts that are still using snow guns and this. This is like kind of not wanting to see the future and trying to be as a doctor, to just treat the symptoms but not the cause. And this is a risk that we face in the music industry. We face this risk because we depend, again, very much on fossil fuels, because the prices of flights are going to increase. That's for sure as well. Because there is going to be more and more, especially with the young generation, some choices that are going to be made. So some young people also don't want to go to a festival if the festival doesn't have any concerns about environmental issues. This is less visible maybe, but there are also a little bit of boycotts of some artists, Taylor Swift being the opposite example of that, but we cannot go on with that. All those massive festivals, at some point, they're going to face regulation. We have some regulation coming. In France now, if you want to apply for funding from the state, so CNM, you have to fill in some eco-conditionality. So you have to prove that you are going to make an effort on that. That could go way further. The EU one day could say, like, we're going to put a limit of CO2 emissions for all industry, and they're not going to say, like, we look at the music industry as a different one. So maybe it's going to be like any big festivals going over a certain amount of carbon footprint is not going to be supported anymore. Or there's going, so this goes with if you have public money. Obviously, if you are from Live Nation or whatever, and you don't get any state support, this is not going to impact you. So this is where we need laws that are going to regulate that. This is not for the near future, but still there are some discussions already on that. And in terms of prestige as well, in terms of many things, and also just as the value of what we do, we believe in artist exchange, we believe in cultural exchange, so we need to fight for that and to maintain that. We've learned from COVID that when decisions are being made for us, we are not the priority, so if we don't defend ourselves and prove also that probably our impact as independent venues and all this is smaller and that we already took the actions. This is going to be better for our resilience as a sector. And also, I would just say, like, the better prepared you are and like what you're doing and all kind of experiments that you can try is going to improve our resilience.
Thanks, Gwen. And what's your view in this, Antanas? Do you think that music can make an actual difference? Maybe the vinyl market as well, or is it more about raising awareness?
Well, I think what we can do is only raise awareness as the pressing plant. But I mean, let's take the example of Taylor Swift. If all the fans would start like saying we won't buy any vinyl unless it is green, then it would be a really big change. And then, of course, she shouldn't release like 7 different colors.
So it also depends on the audience. And have you observed any of that behavior, perhaps from the audience, from the audiences? Have they been more demanding about these standards, the green standards, either it's vinyl, perhaps festivals or any events? Has there been a shift in fan expectations, would you say?
I'd say yes. That, more and more record companies are trying to show that they are doing the green production. And they also like, when they contact us, so we as the small plant, we need to diversify and do something different than the big ones do. So we always try to find options how the labels can show the artists and also can show the fans that they care about environment and care about social problems. So we like encourage to pay the premium on the production, and then we transfer that premium to X organization, like either to food bank or environmental activities, tree planting, which is like really more or less outdated, but it is still important.
It makes the difference, right?
Yeah.
What about shipping? Has there been any ideas about shipping?
Yeah, good point. Shipping is like, especially the air freight is the majority, the biggest problem in the chain. So for the bands and for the labels, like if you plan your release way in advance and then you like avoid all those like last minute shippings, then it's much easier for us as well, because we are preparing like the traveling plan for each shipment. So we always like check if it's possible to ship by road or by sea, and not take the flight, because that reduces the carbon footprint a lot. But you need to plan ahead. Same as with the production. Don't produce bells and whistles on the cover. Choose 140 grams instead of 180 grams. And then there are loads of options of greener PVC, and like regrind is always the option.
Thanks, Antanas. We're going to open up to questions. Is there any questions, opinions, agreements, disagreements? If there's any, raise your hand. I'll come along. In the meantime, there's one. Great. I'll get a mic. Hold on.
I just have a little notice about the environmental song. You said that you don't know about this, but I know a very wonderful song of Michael Jackson that he made about the environmental challenges and the changes, and I think it's a very good example. Thank you. What about you, or is something like this? Or, yeah, Earth Song. Yeah, thank you.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I was being a bit provocative about that, but thanks.
It's a good example, actually, that music can perhaps indeed make a change. I guess we don't know what happened specifically of people who were inspired by that song and who they did, but the minimum that they did raise the awareness, right? So Gwen, if you can just try and summarize it for us a little bit, what are ways that musicians and the music industry can reduce the environmental impact? I know you showed some slides about how flights can be optimized. Is there anything else, and what are the most important points?
So I would emphasize what you said about anticipation. I think this is a key point for this in terms of really trying to think ahead and maybe not depend too much on some easy solutions that we might find. I know it's easier to say than to do it, but this is how we try to work. So when we work with artists on preparing the tour, we try to put the environmental criteria as any other criteria since the beginning of the tour, and really thinking about it. So working also with the technicians. Some musicians also rethought like their instruments. So I have an example of a kora player. So you know the kora is really huge, but he rebuilt 2 smaller koras that he could carry with him in an easier way, so he could travel by train. It's also about talking to each other. One of the latest examples, we had a working group with bookers and programmers, and they never talked to each other outside of just dealing with contracts and talking about the artist. And we just managed to have one programmer talking to a booker, and she was saying, like, for us, it was obvious that it was the easiest to have in the whole fee to include the travel, then the booking agency is dealing with all the tour. And then the booker said, yes, but because the trains are so much more expensive, we always fly, because then for the whole equilibrium of the tour. So then the programmer said, well, now I'm going to change my practices and I'm going to pay the fee for the artist and to separate that from the transportation. So I will pay for the train ticket and I make sure that this is covered from my side. So this is one of the solutions. And then I would say also start with something. Don't try to do to be perfect. We all live in this society, and as long as we live in capitalism, there's not so much we can do. But there are also some good signs. This summer, or just before the summer, there's a festival in Marseille called Bel Air Festival. They had booked an artist from the region, actually. So we always say, we should book more local artists to be green, but this is the counter-example. This is a DJ called I Hate Models. He had a gig, a double gig, one in Marseille, and he double booked in Berlin the same night. So he had to take a private jet to get there. And the festival in Marseille said, we are working on environmental issues. It is not acceptable for us to have an artist traveling by private jet. So they cancelled the gig. And I think this is also something they got. Both sides, the audience was, part of the audience was really proud with what they did. The other part hated them because they really wanted to see their DJ there. But still, I think this was a bold decision and when you stand for what you believe, sometimes it's about taking risks and it's not so easy, but when you have the possibility, I would say.
Very interesting example. One more question from the audience, yep.
I'm interested in this. You told you're working a bit with Coldplay, and there is several tours now, not tours, but actually when bands go somewhere like Adele did in Munich, she builds a stage, selling kind of 8 shows in a row or something, like Coldplay do as well, all set up somewhere, and waiting for audience to come. Usually this audience comes from everywhere. It's actually not this only one country where setup is made. And actually, I remember idea of a Coldplay was we are traveling so much, we have so many trucks on tours and whatever. But don't you think it's much more effect they do for environment when hundreds of planes with the fans are flying to see them instead of several trucks to go to our country. It's like it became kind of opposite, you know. And even Munich mayor told like Adele did a profit for a city about 500 millions probably from tourism. So what is Vilnius is about now? Vilnius is trying to make a gigs and to attract people to go there. Actually, we are at the moment anti-environmental city, for you just to know, and Vilnius government supports it very much to be anti-environment city. And like, so what do you think about this situation? Kind of mainly bands. You know, like idea is brilliant. We are not touring. Fans should come, but instead of like we are increasing carbon situation like in hundreds and millions times.
Yeah, this is a very good point. Actually, what we do with our organization and what we start to push more and more also through different projects and also through some European projects is for the artists to travel more and to get closer to the audience so the audience will travel less. We have to fight a lot with exclusivity clauses. That's the biggest problem when in the contract of the artist you cannot have like if you would have a gig here and probably the venue would say like you cannot play in Vilnius or around or even in the whole country for 3 months before or 3 months after. That's often the biggest problem that we face. And we also often think that this concerns only big artists, but it does with many, even emerging artists. Sometimes it's crazy. So that takes a lot of energy. I don't work with Coldplay. I was just taking this example, but what they did, which I found really nice, the last concert that they did in Bristol was to open first the tickets to the local people. So people from Bristol would have first access to buying the tickets. So this is a strategy, a way of facing that. But of course, as you said, the economical impact is so important. To come back to Taylor Swift, it's not my obsession, but it's an interesting trend right now. She had a concert in Singapore. They signed a contract with the government of Singapore, so that was her only gig in Southeast Asia. And so everyone had to fly because they wanted to organize also a concert in Bangkok, but because this concert was exclusive in Singapore, then the whole at least people that could afford that flew there. It's so absurd that now you have many people coming from the US because they couldn't get a ticket because it was too expensive for the Era tour in the US. So they are flying for 2 days in Europe just to see Taylor Swift. And I didn't see her, but I was in Chicago when she was touring. And so she had 3 gigs in a row. And you had, I would say, minimum 20,000 people that were outside of the stadium without tickets, but just flew there from all over the US just to experiment. This time being outside, buying merch, and just being with other Swifties. So that's the madness we are in. And as you said also, I will finish on that, sorry, but we focus very much on having artists travel by train instead of plane. But if you have indeed 100 trucks following you on your tour, and that's what's happening. I've seen bands coming to festivals in France with trucks. One truck is full of washing machine, for instance, because they tour so intensively that they don't have time to stop to wash their clothes, so everything is being washed on this. That's 100 trucks on the road. So you might say the artist might travel by train, but if you have 100 trucks behind you, then no. So yeah, the solution for me is really to have smaller venues whenever possible, and to have artists travel more, but being supported with that, and the audience traveling closer to where they live to see the artists they want to see.
That's a good point. I like the fact when you mentioned that Coldplay opened up the ticket sales to local people first. That sounds like a good idea. It is becoming a very interesting discussion, but we're coming to an end of it, so we have to wrap it up, and I'd like to wrap it up with a question. One more question? Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, sure.
I had a question. In your research, does it show that the grassroots circuit and smaller venues and smaller bands have less negative impact, and therefore would an environmental approach be a support towards the grassroots music ecosystem rather than the big events?
Definitely. Yeah, this is a very important aspect. And also when we talk about co-benefits, this is something that we see in the studies. And we know that going outside, basically outside of concentration, be it Live Nation or others, this is something that is happening right now in Portland, Oregon, for instance. It's one of the only states, only cities in the US that still have a very vivid independent scene and with grassroots venues, and they're really fighting for that. And you see that the benefit is really big, environmentally speaking. For instance, they have also, like, if the artist is sold out for the 8 o'clock gig, then they will play at 10 o'clock as well, for instance. This is something that we are not used to in Europe anymore, but this is something that quite a lot of artists enjoy doing also.
Okay, we have to wrap it up there. Just one very quick comment from you, Antanas. I would like to hear from you on the closing note. What would you say quickly the artists can do to future-proof themselves and prepare for the potential environmental challenges that might come upon us?
The artists?
Yeah, the artists, the labels, music industry, whatever you can share from your experience.
Just plan.
Plan ahead. Great. On that note, thank you very much. A round of applause for our experts today.